and there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled with the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another incredible installment of Cowboy State Politics Live. From very high above all the puerile and vacuous forms of Wyoming mainstream media, this is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly and permanently ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone, and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Friday, and thank God it is. This has been a long week, and there really hasn't been that much going on. There are a couple of big articles in the Cow Pie, some of which we covered on the morning show. But really, as far as the news goes, it's been kind of dry around Wyoming. Imagine that. Dry in a Wyoming spring. But it is. However, we have a gigantic stack of stuff for this morning's program. The truth is, we're not going to get to all of it, but I've got a bunch of really great sound bites to play for you, and then a really interesting article on where the left is going as it relates to journalism, or what they call journalism. It's a trend that you have probably already seen and maybe even not noticed what it is. But we're going to talk about that. But first, let's get to the news. So if you hadn't noticed, Michael Cohen has been testifying this week, and yesterday he was exposed as the liar that he is on the stand. In fact, I heard a couple of talking heads say that, Michael Cohen is a pathological liar, that he cannot help himself but make up stories. And that was exposed on the stand. From Breitbart News as of this morning, prosecution in trouble as Trump defense traps Michael Cohen on the witness stand. And I quote, defense attorneys for President Donald Trump stunned observers in a Manhattan courtroom on Thursday with a devastating cross-examination of the prosecution's star witness, former Trump attorney Michael Cohen. Convicted liar, convicted perjurer, former Trump attorney Michael Cohen. Trump is on trial for allegedly falsifying business records related to a non-disclosure agreement with an adult film star, Stormy Daniels, or her real name is Stephanie Clifford. The statute of limitations had expired for misdemeanor charges under state law, so District Attorney Alvin Bragg had to find a way to charge Trump with a felony. He did so by alleging that Trump falsified records to conceal a federal crime, though prosecutors have not told the court what that crime is. Cohen had testified earlier in the week that Trump had directed him to falsify records related to the payments to Stormy Daniels, which Cohen borrowed money to pay from his personal funds. Cohen testified that Trump reimbursed him through a misleading legal retainer agreement and did so to avoid reporting the payments to the FEC. Now, interesting note here, neither the FEC nor federal prosecutors have alleged that Trump committed any wrongdoing, possibly because previous prosecutions of politicians for similar payments have failed, and because it is difficult to prove that a non-disclosure payment made to protect one's personal reputation are primarily campaign expenses. You see, FEC law is really complicated, and to get a violation, whatever it is that you're doing has to specifically relate to campaign finance. And let me give you an example. Let's say you're doing a public appearance, some sort of speech or something, and you go out and buy a new suit. Now, you bought the suit so you could look good for your campaign appearance, but it's not only a campaign expense. You are probably going to wear the suit later on. And if you are going to use that for some other purpose other than campaigning, then it is not a campaign expense, period. Campaign expenses are specifically related to your election. Let me give you another example. So let's say you're holding a meet and greet and you go out to buy, I don't know, a couple $100 worth of food for the event. If you want people to show up to a political event, feed them. Free food always brings people out. Now, that food is a campaign expense because it's specifically being used for that campaign event. Now, you may take the food, what's ever left over, home and eat it, but it's not going to last very long. It's probably only going to last a couple days, and it's only a campaign expense. A better example might be pizza, although that fits in the same category. Last week, Reed Reisner held an event in Sheridan in which only a few people showed up to, and he had ordered 20 pizzas. Okay, well, 4 people showed up, and there's a whole bunch of pizza left over, and pizza doesn't really keep unless you're going to eat it the very next morning, and especially if it's been out for a long time, it dries up, and it's really no good. So that pizza is a campaign expense. Not a suit, not something you're going to use later, not a car, none of those things. So with this non-disclosure agreement, now the media is trying to call it a hush money payment. And I guess, that's what the kids are calling it these days. But it's a non-disclosure agreement. That's something that happens in the business world each and every day. How do you think people get severance packages? Well, a company that you're separating from is not going to give you a whole bunch of money just for nothing. Usually it's accompanied with a non-disclosure agreement. There's nothing wrong with these. There's absolutely nothing wrong with paying somebody to shut up. That's not a crime either. So Alvin Bragg is trying to prosecute President Trump for something that's not a crime. Okay, so let's get that out of the way. Now, Cohen on the stand has already been convicted of lying to Congress, unraveled on the witness stand Thursday as defense attorney Todd Blanche attacked key details of his story. For example, Cohen testified for the prosecution on direct examination Tuesday that he discussed the payments to Daniels in an October of 2016 phone call. But that claim fell apart after Blanche showed text messages and call logs that suggested the phone call was about a different subject. So Cohen just unraveled on the stand, and the prosecution was able to show that he's a liar and that he might be a pathological liar, and he definitely is. When it concerns Trump. Now, there was an interesting bit of analysis on CNN, and I don't really watch CNN because it drives me mad, and I don't like paying for windows that I'm probably going to throw something through. But anyway, there's Anderson Cooper was talking about the testimony on CNN, and it's amazing. So let's go ahead and give it a listen. Then we'll talk about it.
Having just witnessed that piece of cross-examination, do you have doubts that conversation happened the way Michael Cohen testified on his direct examination, that he called Trump into
I think it's absolutely. I think it's devastating. I mean, for Michael Cohen's credibility on this. I mean, in this one particular topic, whether it's, he just didn't. I mean, it's hard to. I don't know. Yes, I think if I was a juror in this case, watching that, I would think this guy's making this up as he's going along, or he's making this particular story up.
Okay, let's just stop it right there. Now, Anderson Cooper is having a really hard time saying that the Trump attorneys actually did something good. He hems and haws, full of ums and ers, and he's just having a difficult the explanation of what happened in the courtroom is really difficult for him. And you can tell Anderson Cooper, he's a partisan. He doesn't like Trump. He's been on CNN many times talking about the Russia hoax and all of that, and the phone call and his impeachment. And I mean, the list is really long related to Trump. But here is an example of him having a really hard time saying that the prosecution didn't do a very good job. Now, he tries to qualify his statements. And let's listen to this. And, I'll probably stop and start it a little bit too.
Todd Blanche is pointing out, you were testifying just on Tuesday in this court and all morning long, he's been pointing out, inconsistencies in Michael Cohen's testimony, or at least questionable aspects of Michael Cohen's testimony, but nothing that you would necessarily, as a juror, think, okay, that's clearly a lie. Maybe that's just he was misunderstanding, or he was bragging, or whatever. This one, Todd Blanche clearly saved this to right before the lunch break, I'm assuming.
Okay, now listen carefully to what Anderson Cooper says next, because he's going to explain what Trump's attorney did here, in that he built it up to right before lunch and then dropped the ball on Cohen, asking him very specific details about that phone call. And then the ball dropped and he hit Cohen with it. But listen, Anderson Cooper is going to explain how that got built up. Because
it was just so well crafted, and just point by point walking through the story, which at first seemed, why this seems like a ridiculous story. Some 14-year-old is sending him, nasty text messages, and he's going to call Keith Schiller about it. And then you realize, he showed the phone logs that the prosecutor had shown, and it's the phone call that Michael Cohen had previously talked about. I think it is severely damaging to Michael Cohen's testimony.
Absolutely it is. So, and really what happened is Todd Blanche pulled out a text message log that showed that phone call was about something else. It wasn't about Stormy Daniels. It wasn't about any non-disclosure agreement. It was something else entirely. Michael Cohen is a liar. He has been convicted of it, and he has been convicted of perjury. And this is the chief witness for the prosecution. So that should tell you how things are going for Alvin Bragg in that New York courtroom. Now, any honest juror is going to look at what happened yesterday and say, man, you can't trust him. That didn't happen. And because Michael Cohen is the chief witness and he's the guy that's saying, this is what happened. Well, then that kind of means the whole case is falling apart. So any honest juror should get rid of that testimony entirely. Now, President Biden has been under attack a lot recently, and it seemed to kind of boil up to a point about his interview with Robert Hur, and that was about the House inquiry into him. So Karine Jean-Pierre was asked during a press conference about that, and see, President Biden has now exerted executive privilege over those audio recordings of his interview with Robert Hur because they're incredibly damaging to him. He couldn't remember when he was vice president. He can't remember when he was elected. He can't remember when his son Beau died. That's kind of a big one. And so the White House has been trying to keep those audio files from the House Oversight Committee, and now they've exerted executive privilege. Well, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre struggled on Thursday to defend the White House's decision to block the release of President Joe Biden's recorded interview with Special Counsel Robert Hur. Biden asserted executive privilege over the audio recordings from the criminal investigation into Biden's handling of classified documents, in which Hur decided not to charge the president, in part due to him having a declined mental state. The decision was conveyed to House leaders on Thursday in the hours before the pair of GOP-led committees were expected to move forward with contempt of Congress proceedings against Attorney General Merrick Garland for refusing to fully comply with the subpoenas. Now, there's two pieces of sound from Karine Jean-Pierre. Let me just play you the first one. Here we go.
President Biden decided to block the release of the audio of his interview with the special counsel. And obviously the letter from the White House counsel laid out the reasons about the concerns of being used for political purposes. But that seems to imply that the White House is concerned that these could be politically damaging. So why not just release them, especially with this White House's commitment to transparency?
Well, the transcripts, as you all know, is already out there. I think the second piece of this, too, to note is that the Attorney General made it clear that law enforcement files like these need to be protected. And so the president made his determination at the request of the Attorney General. So just want to make that second point that I made really clear. The Department of Justice and the White House counsel's office have provided extensive written letters, as you all know. I'm sure some of you have read this on this issue. And like I said, that you have seen. And so when it comes to anything further or any specifics, obviously I would refer you to my colleagues at the White House counsel's office. But those are just to make that that second point, again, very clear. This was taken by determination. President.
Blah, 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 blah. Just continually falling over her words. But the important part of that is, well, the determination was made at the request of Merrick Garland. Merrick Garland can't assert executive privilege over anything. Only Joe Biden can do that. And the reason why they don't want it out is Biden sounded horrible. After the break, I'll play you the next piece of sound.
I'm driving black on black. Just got my license back. I've got this feeling in my face. This train is coming off the track. I'll ask Malide if the devil needs a ride because the angel of my ride ain't hanging out with me tonight. I'm driving past your house while you were sneaking out. I got the car door opened up so you can jump in on the run. Your mom don't know that you were missing. She'd be pissed if she could see the parts of you that I've been kissing, screaming, no, we're never gonna quit. Ain't nothing wrong with it. Just acting like we're animals. No matter where we go, 'cause everybody knows we're just a couple animals. So come on, baby, get in. Get in, just get in. Check out the trouble we're in.
You can listen to Cowboy State Politics live every Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. on the Independence Network. You're not going to find a better source of news, entertainment, and commentary than on Cowboy State Politics Live. You know, the program you're listening to right now. And frankly, why would you want to look anywhere else anyway? Let's be honest, only a liberal redcoat commie would do that. And if you want to listen to my podcast, you can find it at cowboystatepolitics.com or anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest way is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. If your name is Sleepy Joe Biden and you can't remember if you put socks on this morning or not, well, I can't really help you with that, but I can definitely tell you why you should have never ran for president of the United States. And now, back to the program. Welcome back to the program. David Iverson behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone, broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns, Wyoming's most listened to political program. Now, if you're just joining us, before the break, we were talking about Karine Jean-Pierre trying to escape questions about President Biden exerting executive privilege over the audio recordings from his interview with Robert Hur. And the whole reason behind that is he was terrible in it. He couldn't remember anything. And in a long-form interview, there's no way, a long-form unscripted interview, there's no way that President Joe Biden can keep up, which is, frankly, this sort of amazes me that he agreed to debate Donald Trump. We talked about that yesterday on the program. So, I mean, the Democrats have something up their sleeve regarding that debate, but I digress. So Karine Jean-Pierre, she's being questioned during the White House press briefing, and she's trying her best to do the tango around all of the questions. Now, the second one, she wasn't so successful. Listen to this.
But does the White House feel that the recording, the audio could be politically harmful, since that point was also raised in the letter?
So I don't want to dive into the specific point that you're making about the politics. I would have to refer you to our counsel's office on that. But there were determination that the president took very seriously on behalf of obviously at the request of the attorney general, and that's how this decision was made.
Oh, yeah. I can't talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. I'll be caught in another lie. I'm going to have to refer you to the White House counsel. Whatever. None of these people tell the truth. They are constant liars. In fact, I've got another, actually, it's right up next in the stack of stuff. How the Biden administration they don't do anything except lie to you. In fact, let's go there now. This is a great piece of sound. Well, Neil Cavuto, and, I used to watch Neil Cavuto a lot on Fox, but I've decided that he's kind of a lefty, but occasionally he does a good job. Now, he had a White House economic advisor on, and the thing devolved into Neil Cavuto asking him 5 times about the same question, and the guy would just not stop lying. From Fox News, and I quote, Fox Business host Neil Cavuto called out the Biden administration's chief economic advisor, Jared Bernstein, Thursday for President Joe Biden misrepresenting inflation. Now, if you remember from, I think it was Tuesday's program, Joe Biden has said that inflation was 9% when he came into office. That isn't even remotely true. Inflation was 1.4% the minute that Joe Biden took office. But he's been traveling the country, not really, traveling the news outlets, saying that inflation was 9% when he took office. And like I said, that's just factually not true. Well, Biden said April 10th, May 8th, and Tuesday that his administration dramatically reduced, and this is a quote, dramatically reduced inflation from 9% down during his time in office. Cavuto pressed Bernstein over his defense of Biden's false claims, telling the economic advisor that he's just as bad as the president. Quote, Jared, why does he keep saying that? Cavuto asked. You're the head of the Council of Economic Advisors. Do you ever whisper in his ear, Mr. President, just to be technical about it, it wasn't 9% when you assumed office. It was 1.4%. Well, this is kind of a long audio soundbite, but I think it's great because Neil Cavuto just, at one point, he just says, you're lying. And so anyway, here it is. You take a listen for yourself.
Well, some might disagree with you on that, but I do want to get behind why the president keeps claiming this. This is what talking about inflation. Take a look.
We have dramatically reduced inflation from 9% down to close to 3%. We're in a situation where we're better situated than we were when we took office. It was 9% when I came to office, 9%. But look, people have a right to be concerned. I think inflation has gone slightly up. It was at 9% when I came in, and it's now down around 3%.
Jared, why does he keep saying that? You're his top you're the head of the Council of Economic Advisors. Do you ever whisper in his ear, Mr. President, just to be technical about it, it wasn't 9% when you assumed office, it was 1.4%. It got as high as 9% in 2022. You brought it down from that, but it was never, ever, ever 9% when you came into office. So why?
Okay, that's the plain truth. It was never 9% when he came into office. After Biden started monkeying around with everything and hit the print button at the Treasury, then inflation went to 9%. But listen to the gobbledygook that this guy spits out.
Why does he keep saying it?
Well, first of all, let me point out that in that very quote you played, the president talked about how concerned he was for households struggling with prices that he consistently
That's not what I
characterizes
asked you.
as too
That's
high.
not what I asked
Okay,
you.
so
Why does he keep misrepresenting this?
He's making the point that the factors that caused inflation to climb to 9% were in place when he took office. I
No,
think
that's not what he said. He said it was at 9%. It would eventually get to 9% a little over a year after that. But the fact of the matter is it wasn't 9%. So if I can't trust him quoting data in real time, why should I believe what he's talking about now?
Exactly the question. If you can't trust him for what he says, why should we trust anything that comes out of the White House? You shouldn't. And, good on Neil Cavuto for questioning him on this, for holding that guy accountable. That's what we like to see here at Cowboy State Politics, hold public officials accountable for what they say. Because honestly, that's the only thing we have to go on. And when they lie to our face, we absolutely have to make sure that we expose them for what they say. Now, one thing to keep in mind here and listen for, this Jared Bernstein character, he never goes back and says, oh, I misspoke. Oh, what I meant was, no, that doesn't happen. He stays on narrative and tries to say, well, no, this is what the president meant. Absolutely absurd. Here we go.
So the annual growth in core inflation in the second quarter of 21 was, in fact, about 9%. And his point about inflation down 60% off its peak is very much the case. So
no, it wasn't. It was not at that. So you're almost as bad as he is. Why can't you just say it was high? It got as high as 9%. You'd be accurate in saying that. And we have now brought it down, and we're struggling in around the 3% area. But it's better than it was. But instead, to hang it on his predecessor, that you inherited something that was through the roof when we were in the middle of COVID. It just seems to the American people, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you're lying. You're just lying.
Well, hold on. I hear you.
Okay, so he just got accused of lying a couple of times. Neil Cavuto goes through the whole thing and says, look, this was the question, and you didn't answer it, and now you're lying about it. Now, anybody who was honest, well, first, if you're honest, you're not going to lie about it. But anybody else would have said, okay, all right, I misspoke. Here's what I meant. But the guy continues to stay on message. Now, he's been pressed a number of times by Neil Cavuto at this point, and he doesn't back off of it. Let's listen to a little bit more.
The president was making the point that I think is unequivocally true. The factors that took inflation to 9% were in place when he took office.
That is not what he said, Jared. And you're a very smart guy with this stuff. You could just whisper, and he's a good friend of yours, obviously thinks the world of you. Many others do as well. You could have just told him, Chief, I got to tell you, Mr. President, whatever you say, you might even call him Joe. That's how close you are. And say, sir, it was not 9%. Stop it with the 9%, because the more you say that, the more people don't believe what you're saying.
Look, I think what the American people care most about is the fact that inflation.
The American people care about truth, Jared.
Hold on, Neil, this only works if you let me talk, okay?
You haven't answered my question. I've asked it 5 times, five ways.
The president was making the point that the factors that caused inflation were in place when he took office, and that's unequivocally true.
All right. Okay, all right. Well, you get the point. This guy's not going to back off of anything, and this is exactly the behavior that you get out of everybody at the White House. Deny, obfuscate the truth, don't ever admit that you're wrong, and I mean, this is what politicians do. We've got a good example of that going on in Wyoming right now. And I guess this is as good a time as any to promo this for tomorrow's weekend update. But we've talked several times about the whole controversy with Reed Reisner. If you don't know who Reed Reisner is, he's running against John Barrasso for the one of Wyoming's 2 Senate seats. Well, he's been putting out pictures on his social media accounts that are clearly misleading. Leading voters to think that he got endorsements that he did not get. The first one was with Donald Trump. And it was a graphic that was made, had him and Trump, and across it said endorsement. What else would people think? Now, Reed Reisner has said, well, no, just you got to read what I wrote there. I'm endorsing President Trump. Okay, whatever. But you have to admit that most people don't read the details. They don't read the fine print. They just look at the picture and then they move on. Highly misleading. And then he did the same thing with Harriet Hageman. And one of the posts said the 2024 ticket, the swamp doesn't stand a chance, or something like that. Don't worry, Harriet, I'm on my way. That sort of thing. Well, clearly misleading. Now, back in February, the Hageman campaign sent him a note that just said, look, we don't like the post that you put up. Would you please take it down? And that's generally how these things go. When somebody doesn't like something that you've put out, they send you a message. And the first one is always, hey, can we work on this? We really don't like it. Please take it down, or please retract it, or do something. And then it's the next letter that is a cease and desist letter, which is exactly what happened in May, several months later. And that one is, it's pretty specific. It says in bold red letters, Reed Reisner does not have the endorsement of Harriet Hageman, or something to that effect. So anyway, I talked to Reed Reisner when he was here in Sheridan, and he swore up and down that he didn't get a cease and desist letter. Well, I got my hands on the documents, and, well, I have a very different interpretation of that. I've got audio from my discussion with Reed Reisner about it, and so we're going to talk about that all on the program tomorrow during Weekend Update. I've got Joey Carenti coming on the show, and there's some more stuff about Mr. Reisner, about his election history, as you might call it. So we're going to talk about all that on tomorrow's Weekend Update. So make sure you pay attention to that. It's going to be an interesting episode because in the audio, Mr. Reisner asked me to do a story on it. So I did what I do, and I dug into it. And I'm going to give you the results tomorrow. So don't miss tomorrow's installment of Weekend Update. More when we come back.
Money, we barely made enough to survive. But when we got up on stage and got ready to play, people came alive. Rock and roll band, everybody's waiting, getting crazy, anticipating love and music. Play, yeah, 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 yeah.
It's spring in the Cowboy State, or as Albert Somers likes to say, spring-ish. Time to get the motorcycle out of the garage, time to go up the mountain, time to get outside and tromp around. And when you're doing that, you still want to make sure that you take care of your feet. The best way that you can do that is order a pair of Kenai boot socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. I know. Your mama always told you that wool socks are only to be worn during the winter. But times have changed, my friends. The Kenai boot socks from the Buffalo Wool Company will not only keep your feet nice and toasty warm, they'll keep them cool and dry in the summer. Trust me, these are the most incredible socks that you're ever going to put on your feet. To get you a pair, go to their website, thebuffalowoolco.com. You're definitely not going to be disappointed. Wyoming is one of the most sought-after places to live. There's a lot of people that want to move to our great state. And if you're thinking about selling your house to one of them, you need a real estate agent that you can trust. That agent is Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. She's lived in Jackson for almost 20 years and has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market. Last year, she sold almost $25 million worth of property. So if you're thinking of buying or selling, give Rebecca a call. Her phone number is 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day. I'm only gonna get stronger.
Watch out. Cowboy State Politics is only going to get stronger. The Independence Network is only going to get larger. Great shows like Cowboy State Politics, Just Plain Joey, Wide Right Turn, The Ramble Room, The Hair Affair with Christine, and a whole bunch more. Make sure that you keep your internet radio tuned in to the Independence Network. You don't want to miss a minute of what happens here. So no one is going to argue that the media is doing its job. Not a single person, I don't think. Well, maybe the people that work for PMSNBC or the Communist News Network, but no normal thinking person looks at the media and says, yeah, these guys are just telling us the truth. They're so fantastic. That doesn't happen. And I've got a couple of examples just to show you how ridiculous the media has become. And then we're going to talk about an article put out by the Capital Research Center and talking about nonprofit journalism that is sponsored by the left. And there's a great report out by the Capital Research Center, and we're going to talk about it. So the first example I have for you comes to us from Politico, a largely left-leaning outfit that, frankly, I don't think you should believe a whole bunch that comes out of it. But this article is entitled, Biden Aides Worry About Psychological Torment as Hunter Heads for Trial. And I quote, President Joe Biden will soon have to watch and wait as 12 jurors in his home state decide whether his son is guilty of felony gun charges. He absolutely is. If you or I lied on an FFL form, we'd be thrown in the slammer. I mean, there's no question about it. For the White House, the scenario of Hunter Biden's first criminal trial, all but assured to start June 3rd, is an unprecedented event in American political history that they never hoped to face. What's so unprecedented about it? Somebody commits a crime, is prosecuted, and then is sent to jail? I don't think that's unprecedented at all. Now, maybe it might be unprecedented for a president's son to get prosecuted, but that doesn't make Hunter Biden any different than you or I. The fact is, he knows better. So maybe we should hold him to a higher standard. I think we should. While aides insist that the White House will have no involvement in the case brought by special counsel David Weiss, some fear it could dramatically impact the president himself, more psychologically than politically. 3 advisors granted anonymity to speak about private deliberations said they and members of the first family are worried about the weight of Hunter Biden's trial will place on the president at an already difficult time for him politically. Well, I'll tell you what's difficult for Joe Biden is actually being president. The guy can't string 2 sentences together. For example,
True international effort to pressure.
So, I mean, obviously, this is going to be a problem. But maybe he should have got a hold of his son in the first place and told him not to engage in criminal behavior or smoke crack while the video cameras are rolling or engage with prostitutes while videoing himself. So maybe the president should have explained that to Hunter, that that's not a good idea. Well, anyway, here is Hunter Biden saying, I made a mistake. Now, think about this. The president and his aides are worried about the psychological strain this is going to put on the president. Yeah, but his son says stupid stuff like this.
But I'm also here today to correct how the MAGA right has portrayed me for their political purposes. I am first and foremost a son, a father, a brother, and a husband from a loving and supportive family. I'm proud to have earned degrees from Georgetown University.
Okay, so that's enough of that. Basically, what he's saying is, I made mistakes. All right, signing an FFL form and saying that you're not addicted to drugs is not a mistake. That's called a lie. Videoing yourself smoking crack is not a mistake. That's a choice. Paying prostitutes and then doing drugs off of their rear ends is not a mistake. That's a choice. And in the soundbite, you heard Hunter Biden blaming all of this on the right wing. Well, that's not at all the truth. It's not a mistake. Those are all choices. And any strain that he brought to the president is well deserved. The president's son should know better than to engage in this sort of stuff. And at the very least, don't video yourself doing it. How stupid could you possibly be? But this is what Politico thinks qualifies as journalism. Now, here's another one. PMSNBC hosts appear concerned jurors won't convict Trump and take away his chance to be president. MSNBC host Andrea Mitchell and Chris Jansing appeared concerned Thursday that jurors won't convict 2024 presumptive Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump and take away his chance to be president. Now, jurors don't decide whether somebody can be president or not. That's what you and I decide when we go to the polls and we vote. Jurors don't have the responsibility of deciding whether somebody has a chance to be president. But that is not what PMSNBC says. Let's see here. Cut number 4. Where is it? Here it is.
with the prosecution having to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt, there's a human instinct to also look at this man who's a former president and a potential future president and ask yourself as a juror, are the issues here so important? And, I know it's an important violation of the law, but when you look at the actual facts of the case, does it seem, unlike some of the other indictments, like classified documents, January 6th and the others, does it all get back to, is this such a big deal that we should take away his chance to be president? If one believes, that that's his right, of course.
Okay, so maybe Andrea Mitchell of PMSNBC is just saying the quiet part out loud. Maybe she's just admitting that this is what this whole mess is about, the presidential election. But my point here is this is what counts for journalism now. Now, journalism would be reporting the facts as they happen, not injecting your stupid opinions into them and then saying that it's journalism. But we've moved way past the time when journalists actually reported things fairly and accurately. We're now at a time when journalism schools teach people that this is what journalism is. Well, there's this report from the Capital Research Center that says that it's entitled "The Rise of Left-Wing Nonprofit Journalism." Now, anytime that you read a report, you should be very aware of who's putting it out. Check them out to see if they're a reputable source. It's not that hard to do. Get on the interwebs and search out the name, and you'll figure out who these people are. And honestly, the only thing that I do whenever I pull up one of these news sites in quotation marks, that I'm unfamiliar with, I scroll all the way to the bottom and look for a link that says "about." And generally speaking, you'll find the people that are involved in it. Well, the next step is just take that name, Google it, and see what pops up. More often than not, you'll find out what their political affiliations are, or, that maybe they're paid for by a radical left-wing organization. But let's get to the report. And I quote, "The decline of traditional metropolitan objective media outlets has affected the news landscape dramatically. Those outlets were more liberal and less objective than they pretended, and their business model, which relied on advertising, has collapsed as online advertising has soared. This has led to targeted partisan journalism on the left and the right. For business as well as political reasons. But while traditional outlets like the New York Times, which they're not nonpartisan at all, just look at their front page and you can figure that out. They've moved further leftward. They and other national outlets have lost the trust of most Americans. The truth is that the media actually has a lower approval rating than Congress, if you didn't know that was possible, but it absolutely is. But in response, left-wing foundations have made massive investments in nonprofit journalism and related efforts. Most recently, liberal foundations led by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation have staked $500 million over 5 years in the hopes of fundamentally upending the local news marketplace and buying the trustworthiness of local news to use as camouflage for left-wing propaganda. Thus, the left continues to expand its existing state-level nonprofit newsrooms that distribute ideological agitprop. Wow, that's a fun word, agitprop. I'm going to have to look that up. The largest is States Newsroom Network. Another is Courier Newsroom. States Newsroom, spawned from the Arabella Advisors Network, operates in 38 states and in 2021 spent $13.2 million, 4 times the closest center-right analog. Franklin News Foundation, another right-leaning analog, Star News Digital Media, is even smaller. The left also works to boost its talent pipelines, feeding into the media environment by focusing on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and leftist-aligned communities, an emphasis that strengthens the internal mobs at major outlets who brook no dissent from the radical line. Okay, I want to stop right there and talk about how this affects Wyoming. A lot of Wyoming politicians repeat the line that this isn't happening in Wyoming. Well, 9 times out of 10, they're absolutely wrong about it. But let me just give you 2 examples of what this article is talking about. WyoFile. WyoFile is largely funded by Liz Storr. radical Democrat Representative Liz Storer, who was the head of the George B. Storer Foundation. If you look into the donors for Wildfile, you'll find her name very prominently. Often in articles where they talk about Liz Storer, they'll even tell you, in full disclosure, Liz Storer sponsors Wildfile. But it doesn't stop there. Another news outlet that Liz Storer is heavily involved in is called High Country News. It's supposed to be some sort of like conservation type magazine, but really what it is left-wing propaganda that preys on the conservation sentiments of most Wyoming citizens. Most of us in Wyoming really do like conservation, and we like to have our outdoors, and we like them pretty and no trash, and we try to convince people to take care of our mountain spaces or just the outdoors in general. Well, Liz Storer uses that organization to collect information on potential donors and shovels left-wing propaganda out to them. Another example of this is Liz Storer has a network of conservation groups. One of them is called Muley Fanatics. Another one is Trout Unlimited. So all of these news outlets are directly tied, the two news outlets and then the conservation groups that I mentioned are directly tied to Liz Storer and her George B. Storer Foundation. So it is left-wing journalism that is sponsored by a radical left-wing Democrat politician. Clear bias. And if you don't believe that, just go and read some of the articles on Wildfile. You'll never find them to be critical of any left-wing politician. And if you want to include the Cowpie or the Cowboy State Daily, they fall into that category as well. They were started as a nonprofit, and for a while, they kind of were sort of center left, center right, but they've moved all the way to the left wing in Wyoming media. The article continues, and we'll get to it after our break. And I just noticed that we're running long, so we'll go ahead and take our third break, and then we'll get back to this. You are listening to Cowboy State Politics Live on the Independence Network. You're not going to find a selection of better news, entertainment, and commentary than right here on the Independence Network, with great voices like Joey Carenti from Just Blame Joey, Ken Pendergraft from The Ramble-Roon, Tom Kelly from Wide Right Turn, and the lovely Christine from The Hair Affair. And of course, my program, Cowboy State Politics, Wyoming's most listened to political program. Also, don't forget to check out the articles section at the website, independencenetwork.us. It's loaded with op-eds, commentary, and news from all around the Cowboy State. You can listen to the Cowboy State Politics podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest place is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. That way, if your name is Joe Biden and you can't remember if you had your pudding today, well, I probably can't help you with that, but I can definitely tell you why you should have never ran for president. And now, back to our program.
I remember I was 8 years old with a blank tape waiting by the radio. Come on, man, play Back in Black. I want to play it back on repeat. I remember Panama City, Long nights with a girl named Christy. She took me down to the Paradise City, then up on Cripple Creek. Still something about a guitar cranked up, head banging to the beat of the bass drum. Still something about a sold out show in the second row with your girl on your shoulder. Still something about raising a cold beer when the lights go down and the crowd cheers. From Delta Soul to Abbey Road, sweet child to sweet home. Still something about rock and roll, rock and roll. Still something about rock and roll, rock and roll. Rock and roll. I saw a Journey in the big Coliseum. No dancing, no lip syncing. I tell you this, don't fight the feeling.
Welcome back to the program. David Iverson, Cowboy State Politics Live. Doing what I was born to do each and every day with talent given to me by God himself. It's absolutely true, my friends. We have to acknowledge the big man and thank him for all of the talents that we've been given. And it just so happens I'm using mine every day, executing host duties flawlessly on the Independence Network and simulcasting. That's a new word. Well, it's not a new word, but it's one I'm bringing back into vogue. Simulcasting to the Cowboy State Politics website. Before the break, we were talking about these left-wing sponsored, quote unquote, news organizations that really are just, left-wing, so-called nonprofit organizations like Arabella Advisors. Arabella Advisors is a giant conglomerate of really, really, really rich left-wing people like Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, George Soros, and there's a whole long list of them. If you want to find out more about Arabella Advisors, Harmeet Dillon and I talk about that during our interview, which is going to be broadcast next Wednesday on the Cowboy State Politics podcast. It's going to be a great interview. You definitely don't want to miss it. Me and Harmeet Dillon, if you don't know who she she ran against Ronna McDaniel for RNC chairman, and she is the attorney principally responsible for keeping Donald Trump on the Colorado ballot. So I'm really excited about that interview. It's a great discussion. I know you're going to love it. And we talk about the funding mechanism of the left wing. So picking up where we left off on this article, further leftward pressure comes from the News Guild Communications Workers of America. So this is the union that represents communications workers, so media types, not this media network, at all, not me, but people like NBC, CNN, PMS, NBC, those sorts. And they're active in many prodigious outlets and far left, even by social justice unionism standards. It recently endorsed the, quote, solidarity with the Palestinians from the river to the sea. Now, there are a lot of media outlets, or so-called media outlets, that are pushing propaganda, trying to lead you to believe that Israel is the aggressor in that war. But you'll see all sorts of left-wing causes being pushed down your throat by these so-called media networks. Nonprofit efforts like ProPublica feed investigations picked by larger outlets. These too have a strong leftward effect, as intended by ProPublica's donors who fund, for example, not only numerous investigations into conservative Supreme Court justices and no investigations into liberal justices. The same is true for right and left-wing politicians. If there's something that comes up about a right-wing politician, they'll investigate it to death. But don't think that any of them are going to be critical at all of any left-wing politician. A good example of that is look at the Cowpie. Find one article that's critical of any of the redcoats. Just one. That's all I need. And then compare that to how many articles are critical of conservative politicians, or who, at the very least, they allude to being crazy or right-wing. Leo Trotsky Wolfson likes to use the word hardline right wing. I mean, on and on and on. But his purpose is to denigrate right wing politicians. But ask yourself, does he ever do that to left wing politicians? Nope, he doesn't at all. The same is true for Wyophile, and we talked about them before the break. Anyway, a lot of these outfits are funded by radical left-wing organizations. And, the Supreme Court justices, this is a great example because they investigate the conservative members of the court, like Clarence Thomas, endlessly. But you'll never hear them be critical of, Sonia Sotomayor or Elena Kagan or anybody on the left. Nope, just the conservatives. Well, the reason for that is these investigations are funded by outfits like ProPublica. But here's another long list of them. They also fund advocacy groups that demand court packing. ProPublica donors include the Sandler Foundation, which also funds Demand Justice, the Hewlett Foundation, which also funds Fix the Court, and Ford. That's the Ford Motor Company, by the way. Open Society, that's George Soros, and others. This investigative journalism is a double-edged sword. One side sharpened to attack the enemies, the other side blunted to protect friends. Social media and other avenues where the left hopes to control information. But Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter has hindered their crusade a little bit. In response, Pierre Omidyar has backed the phony Facebook whistleblower, and Media Matters has launched pressure campaigns against Twitter's advertisers. Media Matters is another great example of this left-wing funding so-called media apparatus. It was started by Hillary Clinton and George Soros. It was one of the few public appearances that George Soros actually showed up for and handed Hillary Clinton the check. And I think it was $2 million, I think, at the time. I might be wrong about the dollar amount, but he handed Hillary Clinton a check to set up Media Matters. And what they do now is they attack conservative, right-wing, I guess you could call it, but conservative journalists taking their words out of context. If you go onto their page, you'll find all sorts of stuff about Sean Hannity, Mark Levin, you name it, taking, just all of them out of context. But that's what they do because they're funded by George Soros. Fact-checking groups assist with control of social media and political narratives. Here, as everywhere in the media landscape, the left enjoys more groups and more money than conservatives. Harvard's Nyman Labs says, quote, publishers hope fact-checking can become a revenue stream. Right now, it's mostly big tech who is buying. Nonprofit support comes from the usual suspects, including Soros, the Tides Foundation, Ford, and the Carnegie Foundation. In 2022, the Democrat National Committee released a 5,000-word action plan for aggressive censorship, aka combating online misinformation. Social media statistics indicate earlier changes by Facebook and other platforms resulted in significant boosts for mainstream media outlets and equivalent losses for their competitors. Elon Musk's community notes model for fact-checking on Twitter, which crowdsources the work, is a dramatic improvement. Now, the question is, does any of this affect Wyoming? I gave you two examples, but let's look at the state, quote, paper of record, the Casper Star Tribune. The Casper Star is not owned by a Wyoming company. It's owned by Lee Enterprises, which is a Virginia-based media conglomerate. The paper isn't even printed in Wyoming. It's printed in Nebraska. Now, if you subscribe to the Casper Star, every once in a while, most of the time during the winter, you'll get a notice that says delivery delay or something like that. Well, what happened is they closed the road and they couldn't get the truck from Nebraska into Wyoming to deliver the paper. So even the Casper Star Tribune falls victim to all of this. And the point is that a lot of these media outlets aren't independent. They aren't fair. They aren't actually journalism. It's left-wing propaganda. On any given day, go to the Casper Star Tribune website and look at all the stories. Most of them, and a while ago, I did a study into how often the Casper Star Tribune advocates for abortion. And in a 2-month span, actually, I think it was 3 months I looked at it, there was only 2 editions where they didn't mention abortion. So, I mean, they're clearly a left-wing news outlet, just like the Cowboy, just like Wildfile. And I mean, there's very little, I mean, there are very few exceptions to this left-wing journalism. One of them happens to be the Independence Network, which I'm broadcasting on right now. But that was a network that was put together by myself, Joey Carenti, and Ken Pendergraft. And the reason we did it is to provide you an alternative news source and to actually back up what we're saying with facts and data. You know, when we talk about a politician, it's not just our opinion, we back it up, which is exactly what we're going to do on tomorrow's installment of Weekend Update on the Cowboy State Politics podcast. So make sure you don't miss that one. It's going to be a great discussion. Also, I've got a very important announcement from a popular politician that we're going to play for you. That's going to happen at 1 o'clock, and I'm also going to repost it on the podcast. So if you don't get the Independence Network, you can listen to it on the podcast. But for now, from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio, I'm David Iverson, and this is Cowboy State Politics.